our focus as a group of partners that are working on companies that can make major investments in Virginia. We've have relationships with kind of a quick rundown of the companies in those buckets. Many times with all of the companies on this list. And so they're all aware of Virginia. We continue to have the ability to establish a location in the U.S. So on the next slide, I think it's important when we are thinking about what we want to accomplish here in Virginia, that we have, keep in mind what the competitive landscape looks like in the states that we like to think we're all working together to develop the industry. In some ways we are, but in terms of the economic development aspect of this, it's kind of a competitive space. And these next three slides, so I put together last August, I'm pretty sure that's still up to date. If anybody catches something that needs to be corrected, please let me know. But one of the things to keep in mind is that, especially in New York and New Jersey, there's the greater density of projects. And with that density of projects, likely a lot of that supply chain investment that will be driven to the Northeast. Not to say that Virginia doesn't have opportunity, we certainly do, and in some respects, have an environment that is much more conducive to some of these companies that want to invest in the supply chain. But I think it's important to keep in mind that kind of center of gravity around southern New England, New York and New Jersey will certainly drive supply chain investment up there. Next slide, please. So the other, we think about what needs to be done to build out the offshore wind industry. In addition to these facilities, so we can manufacture components in the US, we need port infrastructure to do installation and staging. We need vessels to do the installation offshore. So Virginia certainly has an advantage compared to the other states that were looking on that last slide with respect to terminal infrastructure. It was interesting. There was an operations and maintenance conference in Virginia Beach that now the Oceanic network, the business network for offshore wind is now Oceanic. They had a O&M and health and safety summit in Virginia Beach, and a gentleman from Boston Maritime that's developing an O&M terminal facility in Massachusetts was describing all the aspects of their facility and others in New England, and I essentially viewed it as an advertisement for the great benefits of Virginia compared to New England when they're talking about a facility that's tens of acres, and we're talking about the facilities that we have here that are potentially in some cases hundreds of acres. So terminals and port infrastructure are still something that separates Virginia from others, although some investment, like I mentioned, in Massachusetts is kind of narrowing that gap a bit, but really important for our value proposition to the industry. And then on the next slide, this is a really interesting one. So it's not a comprehensive list, but it's a list of announcements of supply chain investments in the US. And the really important takeaway from this slide, and it's very different from when I last presented this slide, is that you all have kind of heard about I call it like the industry reset that's going on, where some projects are being postponed, some are canceled and going to be rebid into new solicitations. In that same vein, I can probably point out, at least 2 or 3 projects on this list that are not going forward. Unfortunately, one of our own, with the blade facility, Siemens Gamesa blade facility, but, looking at, project in Albany, powers and transition pieces, that's hasn't really gotten going and is like probably not going to, or will be significantly delayed. I have heard there are issues with the cable facility, at Brayton Point in Massachusetts, also the Hellenic one, in Maryland. And so I think with this reset, and this is a kind of just a Matt, thought and commentary, is that early on, we were seeing that states were willing to subsidize supply chain investments, by companies at the direction many times of developers, and ratepayers were going to, subsidize the cost of those investments. I think with that, in that reset where costs of project development are going up so much, there's probably less of an appetite to subsidize supply chain investments in that way. And in my view, that's really good for Virginia, because I think when when we're operating in a kind of a pure market where companies are making location decisions on the basis of the best place to do business, lowest cost place to do business, most advantageous place for them to serve the East Coast, Virginia just becomes more competitive. So the more that this becomes a pure market in terms of deciding where to locate the supply chain, I think Virginia is going to be in a better and better position. So I'm actually probably a bit more hopeful than I was even 6 months ago. Just a great example of what is maybe going forward on this slide up and down the East Coast. So go ahead to the next slide. So this is a slide I use probably in every one of my presentations. You all have probably seen some version of it. And I show it again just to kind of illustrate why Virginia is competitive relative to these other states. Again, I mentioned our unmatched port infrastructure, like also our unmatched workforce in the maritime sector and the skilled trades compared to some of these other states. And then in particular, we're often competing in general in economic development. We're often competing against states like Tennessee and North Carolina, Texas. But when we're competing against states or Northeast, we really shine when it comes to business climate. So that's something that we'll certainly tout and make sure that folks that are investigating Virginia are aware of.
Hey, Matt.
Yes.
A question, excuse me for interrupting, but back to your point earlier about just, the costs, Northeast versus down here. Is that embedded in pro-business climate? When you say there's more favorable rates here than in the Northeast, where does that point fall into your slide?
Yeah, I would absolutely put that in the pro-business climate when you consider when we talk to companies, they're often interested in specific incentives that the state of Virginia and localities can offer. But I mean, essentially, when you're thinking about labor costs that are much lower in Virginia, that's a kind of a hidden incentive, and other things I think are that cost structure piece into the favorable living. That answer that.
Well, it was kind of a leading question because we assume that the industry will capitalize on the better rates here in Virginia. There's an assumption there, but how do we proactively make that happen? Is it up to the power companies just to discern, who's the best offer, or, how do we advertise that in realistic terms that this is a better place?
So we essentially, as an economic developer and the folks we're working with, we're doing that on a basis of speaking with individual companies. Our marketing materials provide that type of information. So we are out there currently speaking to the industry about the characteristics of Virginia that would be advantageous to stay located. So it's just the general marketing effort through our collective economic development operation.
But all the elements that exist here, you know, whatever they are.
Yeah.
Do they use this as, you know, a negotiating point that we have the best rates? And how do we know that? You know, we have the best rates, we can beat so-and-so up in the Northeast by, you know, 20%.
When you say rates, just for my own clarification, what rates are you referring to? The cost of energy or the rates, the cost of having a business here, like that pro-business part, taxes
Well-
and housing? Like, it's 200% more expensive to live in Boston than here. I looked into that. So, so that's what I clarified to me so I understand what you're asking.
I guess it's all.
Okay, all of the
You know,
above.
so, you know, which brings up another point, actually. How do you express that in real terms that's understandable? It's not labor force, but it's everything, you know, it's housing here, you know, schools. You know, whatever those rates are, plus, you know, the actual business costs that are.
It's a great question. So, both the Hampton Roads Alliance and the Virginia Economic Development Partnership are able, so we have done this for numerous companies that are considering Virginia versus other states.
Yeah.
We will provide customized reports for them, where they tell us the things that are important to them, and we will compare, let's say, for just, you know, we'll do it for a labor force comparison. That's an example of Hampton Roads in Virginia versus, you know, a region in New Jersey or something like that. So, DEP actually has a tool that you actually can go online and say, I want to compare all of the costs of doing business in the New York metropolitan area versus Hampton Roads, and from tax rates to the cost of unemployment insurance, you can compare those at the state and the regional level. So that's just an off-the-shelf tool that we use, but we also work with the companies we're talking with to do customized analyses that are comparing this very specific regions where they're considering locating projects. And so we ask them, you know, what's important to them, and then we will put together a customized report so they can specifically compare Virginia to a competitor.
Thank you.
I hear you say cheap labor as being a pro.
I'm pretty sure I didn't say cheap labor. I said less expensive
Less
labor.
expensive,
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, because you get what you pay for, so I wouldn't really want tons of being cheap labor.
That's a term I wouldn't use, but it is a fact that labor in Virginia is less expensive than.
Because the cost of living is so much
Yeah,
more expensive
exactly.
everywhere else, so it's relative.
Okay.
Yeah.
Worker comp rates, utility costs, I mean, you take all those factors into. I still think and I would defer to Ashley, sort of, you know, from a developer perspective, what are those mechanisms in place that are sort of maybe leading trailing supply chains to not, I'm saying require, but let's say it's looked favorable upon investing in Massachusetts or Rhode Island or New Jersey versus, you know.
So those, while it's the developer, it's really the O and M or the OEMs and the tier ones that are going to make those decisions. We can honestly, when offshore wind developer can sit anywhere and develop.
But your PPA.
Oh, for the power purchase
Will
agreement.
look favorable,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
there's gonna be.
well, it impacts the cost of our sale to enter into. So there's that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, and this is me actually talking off the cuff, not representing my company at all. But I mean, it would make, just seems reasonable and common sense to say that the cost of the power that's being purchased anywhere in a more expensive area to live overall, comparing it to here is going to be, it's the demand also, though. That's the hard part with the cost of energy. They have a huge demand up there, so they're arguing for it. They're fighting for it. Al probably can speak to this better than me, but they're fighting for, you know, they're in bidding wars to get the power from these 800 megawatt projects versus the 2.5 ones that we have right off the coast here in the mid-Atlantic, ready to go, you know, and so that impacts it, but it also impacts just these auctions as far as that goes too. I mean, so, but your point is not lost on the fact that that does make a point when you're factoring in all those things to sell it, it does make a difference to where the area is and the cost of everything that's involved in actually developing a project. Sorry,
No,
did that,
very helpful.
I don't know.
Addendum again.
Yeah, and that was just Ashley.
All right. Hopefully that was.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. All that information. You can go to the next slide, please. So I just wanted, this is kind of a follow-up on one of that icons in that last slide highlighting our, our port infrastructure. You all are probably well aware of this, but, work is going on, both at Portsmouth Marine Terminal. I don't know, Chris, if you're gonna give an update on what's going on at PMT. So I'll keep it short, but, Virginia Port Authority is developing the premier, with Dominion Energy Logistics Terminal for offshore wind on a portion of PMT. That project is well underway. They've already received first components for sea valves moving there. And then Fairwind Landing, right across the water. One of our, I'll say one of probably the three sites that we can really market in our region, to somebody that is looking to make a large supply chain investment that needs significant acreage on deep water. It's really potentially Portsmouth Marine Terminal, Fairwind Landing, and then there's a site in Chesapeake called Chesapeake Deepwater Terminal, that's on the southern branch. The Fairwind Landing, they had gotten some money, through the state of Virginia Business Ready Sites Program to do some demo work. Dominion Energy is, starting, construction, on their, Marine Coordination Center there, and then, there will also be a shipbuilding component from the Miller Group controls that property, and they have a company called Fairlead, so they'll do some shipbuilding there, but a good half of that site is really being marketed as a place for offshore wind component manufacturing. Recently, the city of Norfolk was awarded a port infrastructure development grant of almost $40 million, which has to be matched. So there's gonna be significant funding, and around $80 million to help upgrade infrastructure at Fairwind Landing. So that's really significant, especially when you're thinking about and when you're speaking with a company that's looking to make a supply chain investment and they're looking at incentives that are offered, say, Virginia versus other states. When you can say, well, we have an incentive package, that provides this amount in cash grants, this amount in tax, relief, this amount in, workforce training assistance. But if you're also telling them you're gonna have $80 million of avoided cost, if you go to Fairwind Landing, that you're not gonna have to make that infrastructure upgrade, that's a pretty compelling story as well. Go ahead.
Well, speaking of the story, the point that you're making here is Virginia has doubled down on offshore. And does that strategic message come out? Does that come out from Richmond, come out from Hampton Roads? But basically what you're saying is we've doubled down with all the problems over the past 2 years. Virginia's making it work and making it work efficiently and making it work. It's multifaceted, all the different teams that you have in this, enterprise. So I don't know. I kind of wonder what's the strategic message from the governor from
Yeah.
Richmond.
So I'll quickly just cover a few things because I want Matt to be able to finish up so we can keep going. The governor has included offshore wind in his all the above energy plan.
Right.
Those of us involved more in the supply chain sector here in the state and the Hampton Roads area, the Virginia Maritime Association, the Hampton Roads Alliance, the Port Authority. Part of this is you viewing it through the lens. I don't want to say as much about offshore wind for some of these things, but it's really about the utilization of the supply chain and our maritime infrastructure. So offshore wind at this moment tends to be the components and pieces that we're taking advantage of. But it's really about the strategic use of our transportation infrastructure and our supply chain to inhibit offshore, or not inhibit, excuse me, but to really just bolster offshore wind, the industry from the supply chain and side, right? If that makes sense. So,
And I'll add something just kind of more general about really the positive narrative that we can convey to people about Virginia. So not only are we investing in port infrastructure, we also have a really positive story with regard to project development too. And that you see that the sea valve project is on time and on budget. First monopiles are going to be installed later this spring. That can be contrasted to some things that are, happening in the Northeast where projects are not necessarily going forward. Not all of them, but some of them are going forward on time. So we have a positive story to tell with the assets we have, with, the project that is being built off of our coast, and the positive development there. So I think we have a good story.
And those delays are happening because of cost. And you can read all the articles that they provided in our email. So there's that.
Yeah.
All of them.
Well, read all the articles, that come through. But I'm just wondering is there one strong strategic message that says we're doubling down? Wrong word, but words. But that's what Virginia's doing because we have worked this and it's working efficiently. The progress that we're making.
I think Will probably cover some of the legislation that may be perceived as a way to
Double down.
double down.
But I would say again, with our, sorry, Will,
No.
with our messaging, all of those things, I'll go back to, the second slide I showed about all the companies that we're in contact
Yeah.
with. We are providing that message to the industry,
Okay. Yeah.
because we're individually interacting with them, so the industry at large is aware of these things that are going on.
Where is
Thank you.
Virginia compared to other states as far as its investment into the infrastructure?
As far as,
Would you basically want to see more money?
I mean, I think anybody that is in the industry would say that more money is needed no matter where you are to develop terminal infrastructure. So, and you all, and I'm sure that these slides will be shared. That one that goes into port infrastructure, you can kind of see how port infrastructure is broken out by state. Other states are investing more, state money in port infrastructure. I would say we're kind of lucky in that we don't necessarily have to do that because we started from a better, investment is needed, but we started from a better place than our competitor states in terms of terminal infrastructure.
And Jim, I want to echo what Matt was saying. I mean, ultimately, I think Virginia, through Go Virginia funding to really stand up what Matt's efforts have begun and it has taken forward over the past 3 years, has really proven successful because we are now globally recognized in the offshore wind space. And I don't think that's overstating how the great work that I think Matt has led, and then obviously all the various stakeholders to really take the message. And it's port infrastructure. Yes, we're very fortunate, but then that workforce piece is so recognized, and that we have such a robust existing shipbuilding. That workforce is golden, and that is, again, it's recognized. And then having a successful project. I mean, Dominion is, on budget and on time, and really obviously unique in that they're the utility provider, not a developer, but something that people, again, globally are recognizing that this project here in Virginia is tracking well, and we're leading by example of success. Sure, there are little hiccups along the way. Ultimately, I think you stand back and look at other projects and other markets up and down the East Coast. Virginia is like the one star, or that's the one, optimistic light out
Well,
there.
and the market is proving that there's some things we can't talk about yet, but you should see in the near future this year, maybe sometime. It's like there are major projects in the work for manufacturing to come here that are independent of any of the projects here. So what that means is companies that see the value in Virginia, not because of a nearby project, but because of who and where and what Virginia is and offers. And so that, I think, is a huge testament to why Virginia is a competitive and best place to do business, because it is attracting major investments that we will hopefully be hearing public announcements.
It's a great segue to, yeah. But I also want to follow up really quickly on Chris's point, and that we are recognized. I mentioned the Oceanic Network. States that have more resources than Virginia, we are recognized as kind of being a leader in how we're approaching supply chain development, and that when we go, to these major trade shows and other events, we're going with a delegation of folks that essentially are kind of companies can get their questions answered because we're bringing economic developers, we're bringing folks from the Port of Virginia, we're bringing Will from the major trade association. So we're kind of taking a collective stakeholder approach to economic development to bring the expertise that these companies are looking for to essentially help answer questions about, why Virginia is the right place to invest. So instead of just having, somebody who is lightly knowledgeable, we're bringing deep knowledge through a variety of partners to interact with these companies. And it's really been, I think, recognized as best practice.
Thanks.
So you can go ahead to that next slide. I think this is kind of the money slide, even though it's a short one. So again, setting the groundwork of essentially, at least from my perspective of 3.5 years of work on supply chain development, 2 of those really solely doing that. We at the Alliance, along with our partners at BDP and VMA, again in the port, working, several large active projects. And we kind of classify projects in certain stages. It can be kind of just an open project where a company is still in a very broad decision-making process. But we are working 2 projects right now where the company has received an incentive proposal from the Commonwealth of Virginia and the locality that they are considering located here in Hampton Roads. And so 2 projects have received proposals, and those projects represent approximately $1.2 billion in capital investment and would create directly 950 high-wage jobs. And so
Just direct.
that is just, direct job creation for those 2 projects. And so we are working to close those projects, and I think I'm not stepping out of bounds by saying that we are, nothing is guaranteed yet, but I'd like to see announcements, at least for one of those projects, and hopefully both by the first half of this year. So that's. And then finally, kind of, this is, I've talked around these points pretty much the whole presentation, but, just in general, a high level strategy, again, goes back to trying to attract those anchor manufacturers. We have a very real case of a company that wants to manufacture a major supply chain component here. But they also are interested in bringing their suppliers with them to Virginia and are looking for a facility that's large enough that could accommodate them. So I think it's really starting to prove out our kind of approach that, if you start, we want all aspects of the industry here and need them to support projects during the O&M phase as well. But that kind of domino strategy of attracting some anchor tenants, I think continues to be the right approach.
Not to piggyback on multiples, that if we in Virginia do great things to make it affordable for companies to, and with all of the attributes we have here, then when they're bidding on these, even if the project is up north, wherever it is, it could be in California, wherever it is, that is a benefit to their submission. So it makes sense that companies would want to establish themselves here just to save the cost when they're doing the proposals in order to be awarded the project.
And then the second aspect of this kind of 2-pronged strategy is really to play up our ability to serve the industry from a kind of construction and logistics standpoint. And I'm happy to have Chris talk about PMT if that's what you want to do.
Sure. I was gonna do it at the end, but-
Yeah, go ahead and wait if you want to wait, but yeah.
Yeah, because, how much time we have.
Yeah, so that's my last slide. Happy to answer any questions that you'll have or try to answer. Go ahead.
So, Matt and maybe, any of the staff, can anybody speak on the offshore wind manufacturing grant? Small business, grant that was established, but VEDP was working on logistics and structure and this, and where does that stand?
So I'll start, and I think I'll let Will finish up. So I was on a committee that helped the VEP kind of structure that grant. And so because of how the language was written in the budget that funded that, it was, I would say, unfortunately restricted only to manufacturers. So there's a kind of a limited pool of companies that can apply. I think it would probably have been more beneficial to we know just that there are a number of companies that are outside of the manufacturing space that, we need to have the service industry. So that's just kind of a commentary about how it's structured and to let you know who is eligible. And maybe a reason why Will and I had a conversation. So Will is on the committee that is evaluating applicants, and I believe there have been 2 applicants.
There's 2 applicants at the moment, and Friday, the committee is actually getting together to review, the applicant review committee is to look at these 2 proposals. So it's cool. I mean, one of the companies is in Richmond, one of the companies is here locally in Chesapeake. So I think naturally we would have liked to see more. I think if this grant continues, we'll probably want to play a little bit more, help BDP with the language about not making it so restrictive to manufacturing, offshore wind manufacturing adjacent, and maybe open it a little bit more for logistics and supply chain. But we're encouraged to see 2 applicants. My hope is if there's only 2 applicants, then maybe we can fund both, but we'll see.
Well, that was one of our recommendations also, was to include R&D, expanding that grant for R&D also, because a lot of times R&D leads to better manufacturing, better parts, better stuff. So is that something that the department is recommending for the General Assembly, is to expand that grant anyway and expand the uses?
I'm not aware of anything at this time, like a budget request for that specific project. There are approximately 80 energy bills. And Friday was the deadline, one of the deadlines. So needless to say, there's a lot of analysis and review going on that's not complete. And as of yesterday, Larry, who's our policy lead, he's not on the call because he's chasing down this legislation, trying to get better information about the intentions and purposes of some of it, which always is mysterious when it's first introduced. And neither of you have both of those in your packets, but I have not heard anything about that. I think maybe they probably want to get a year or 2 under their belt.
Well, I think this first round will be telling, and I don't know if it's a conversation that we just need to have with BDP or whomever owns the language for this specific grant, especially after we've gone through this one cycle and we can see how it goes. But I think that's definitely open for the conversation. Thank you, Matt.
Appreciate
Matt
it.
is always just the right guy. So the right guy. All right, moving on. Now we're going to talk about some aerial project updates. This is related to R&D. And again, huge thanks to Kathy and the work she's done to really spearhead the subgroup. And we've brought in another one of the wind Avengers, if you will, Jerry Kroner, who's the executive director of Open Seas, part of ODU, to give us an update on aerial. So I will turn it over to Kathy and Jerry.
And I will turn it right over to Jerry.
Okay, can I stand up or do I need to be near one of these?
I think that Mike can hear you. If someone online, if you have trouble hearing Jerry, just let us know and he can
Shout
pick
out.
up. Yeah.
I prefer to stand up most of
Sure.
the time.
But
Know
just
some of you, good to see some familiar faces. Glad to be here. Thanks for the introduction, Will, and Kathy for setting up the time. I'm here today to look for your support around one active proposal we have going in and one we were just awarded by NOAA. So go to the next slide, please. And the concept's around something called aerial. As Matt knows, we've been working on this for kind of a while, trying to find funding for the whole thing. I think I found a source. So what I'm really looking for here is for support. And the idea is, you always ask in the world of innovation and entrepreneurship, what's the need? Huge needs out there. We got to drive down the cost of offshore renewable energies, and that's across the entire life cycle, which means innovation. It means better technologies. And to develop better technologies, you need places to develop them, to test them, and that's really, really hard. If you're on the developer side, like Gavin, Grid, or Dominion, or whomever, you want that stuff de-risked before you put it into a production operation. So you got one side of the folks who are innovating, the other side of the folks who are developing, and really don't want to take the risk of untried technologies, untested, unproven stuff. That's what Aerial's about. Next slide, please. So what's the approach? Okay. What we're trying to put together is a constellation of assets against which folks who are trying to develop or test things, or do certain things, can go to and try that stuff out. Okay. One of the things we actively have going on right now, we're about to launch with the city of Norfolk this fall at Willoughby Spit at the boat launch facility, is a testing area for unmanned, basically maritime vehicles. So that'd be part of it. The other part we want to add into there is within the same framework, put in the offshore leases, because that's another place you can go to. So the program approach have a number of assets like that. Okay. Provide a structured environment for developers and researchers and those folks to go and do their stuff. With the end result, you're accelerating job creation, you're accelerating innovation, you're working to drive down the levelized cost of energy as you're producing stuff out. And the other bit is really making Hampton Roads in Virginia play higher on the stage of folks who are important in this area. We can't always be buying our innovations from someplace else. It's an opportunity for the stuff we're doing here, but it's also an opportunity for markets around the world, because as you all know, this is a global market. So, and also last part, we want to be leaders in the world, or at least in the top tier, mentioned in the same breath as the Woods Holes and the places along those lines. Next slide. Okay, so elements. You see the elements we've put together. Obviously, there'll be places. Hopefully the offshore leases, the Willoughby Spit facility, the third island of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel, and a couple of others who have said, hey, we'll do this. Other element in there is, how do you know that if you do X, Y, or Z, it's going to have a financial return? That's where modeling comes in. We're developing really, really strong relationships right now with the National Renewable Energy Lab. We just got brought on as a power connector to essentially help them with their programs to get rid of the problem of investing in sort of technological development that at the end of the period, there's no investment and there's nothing that goes out into the real world. So helping them align that. So they've got models on this stuff, at least for offshore wind operations and maintenance, and they're going to be developing the same thing for other offshore renewable energy elements. Third-party certification. American Bureau of Shipping has indicated the willingness to be those guys who say, hey, you say your item can do that? Yeah, it does that. So I know if I change a parameter, it'll have this economic output, right? I've got these guys who say we can do that. I've got American Bureau of Shipping that says, yeah, they can. Throw in the price and you can figure ROI, right? Pretty good. And then kind of putting programming around it. So competitions, supportive things, design projects, working with universities, working with startups, working with innovators to try to solve those gap issues out there. And last, business acceleration and incubation type stuff to help those companies grow. Next slide. It's kind of a graphic. The Virginia offshore leases be a great place, especially for a reference standard for certain types of behaviors. The Massachusetts Blade Test Facility has indicated a willingness to come in and do this. American Bureau of Shipping, Willoughby Bay, National Renewable Energy Lab, that our relationships getting better every day with. And as I said, Chesapeake Bay, third island out there, but when you don't have to go 21 nautical miles offshore to do some sorts of things, right? Next slide. So there it is. This is the current status, some of the things we've been doing. All right. Talked about the Willoughby Bay. That's going to launch either summer or fall this year. There should be some sort of event that goes along with that to really promote it, probably some sort of competition supported by NIPSI and the state. We were awarded a planning grant from EPIC from DOE because of our initial planning on these items. Been working with NATO on related items. Power connector I mentioned. I've been talking with the Navy. I brought the concept up to the Navy. They really, really like it because it solves a problem they have. And the problem is, I'm a person who says develops a better way of doing survey. And maybe I'm using platooning of unmanned vehicles or something like that. So instead of a 20-meter swath or 30-meter swath, I can now double that. Significant impact on costs because you're talking vessel transit time, right? Okay. How do you know it does that? Well, the Navy's got ranges. The problem is you can't get into them. you don't have the security clearances. So they're saying, boy, this would be great. We'll support this because this is a way for folks who don't have clearances and can't get into Carter Rock and some of the other stuff done by the Navy to have facilities and capabilities to advance the science and solve problems that are not only important to offshore wind and offshore renewables, but they're also important to national security and stuff the Navy's doing. A highlighted one is kind of the big eye on the prize thing. We were just, well, it's pending award. They're still working through the paperwork stuff, but the kickoffs down in New Orleans on the 20th of February. We got awarded by NOAA what they're calling a climate data accelerator incubator grant. Cut through all the IRA language that's in there. Really what they're looking to say is, hey, to develop stuff out in the oceans, you need better data. And one of the tiers in there is offshore renewable energy. So when we were highlighting what we're going to do, that's one of the big ones we're concentrating on. And the idea is to put together a capability where you're identifying innovation and helping accelerators and incubators to advance it along and also bring in investment. So we're on board for that. That's the planning grant. Phase 2 of that is a $10 million grant for 4 years for the area. That would be huge to add that innovation part of sort of our economy. You know, we're looking for the big guys to move in. We're looking for the manufacturers. We also need to be hitting the innovation part. This whole aerial concept fits in really, really well with that. So my goal is by the time we submit that phase 2, not only here's our plan, but we've got the Willoughby thing, we've got the aerial thing, we've got these other items lined up in some other relationships, which is going to put us in a much better position to be taken from the 15 phase 1 awardees down to the 5 who get awarded $10 million. That would be a huge thing for the area. So what are we doing now? Like I've been doing for the past couple of years on this thing, I'm trying to line up the funding for this type of stuff. The good thing is I think I found it. I've got a really good relationship with what used to be the Office of Economic Adjustment. When I was hired to ODU 7 years ago, it was to fix one of those programs at the university. It was only supposed to last for 2 months. 7 years later, go figure. But I've gotten probably about $2 million worth of grants from those folks over time, and they want to provide more money. One of the things we were looking at was the wind site thing, Al. They were looking at financing that, but now we're joined up with Virginia Energy against that RSTEP grant. So you can't really get 2 grants paying for the same scope. I think there's legality issues. So I talked to the folks about this aerial concept and that the Navy was on board. So this is something they're saying, hey, submit that. We're really interested. So my goal is to submit a grant to those guys to get basically the detailed planning and the initial money of initial staffing and operations to get it up and going. And depending upon how that looks, then, you know, will it take some stuff from the General Assembly? Is it going to be, you know, is there a sustainment model where you have folks paying for use, those sorts of things? We don't know until we do the full planning. Next slide. So what's the ask? I'd love a letter of support from you all going against that OLDCC thing. That would be really strong because I can get one from you. I can get one from the Navy, which gives the DoD side. I think that gives us a pretty good lock on getting a few $100,000 out of them for the purpose of getting the thing up and going. You all, as I understand it, have been looking for some way to bring those leases under a framework where activities going on out there, not necessarily on the towers. That obviously needs to be. There's a lot of coordination with Dominion out there, but we've got these places of land or undersea territory out there, which would be great to use as a reference standard that if somebody's trying out a new survey device or somebody's trying out to see if they can make a bunch of drones actually act as a swarm, which is a really, really hard problem, that we have a place that's very well mapped. It gets better mapped every time somebody goes over it. And just like anything, you say your fish can, your survey fish can detect these things, fine, run it over. What do you pick up? Using it for those types of activities would be really, really powerful and useful. So if you would consider doing that, We already have an MOU in place with you, which when I read it, it doesn't look like it's ever gone away because it's in perpetuity until one side or the other goes, don't do it anymore. So we've got a mechanism to do that. So considering that, I need advice and participation in both an aerial board, but also for this NOAA data thing. One of the things NOAA is looking for is that we have industry participation and we have government participation. Okay. I've got other folks lined up, got a bunch of folks from the offshore wind industry who we've been very successfully pinging to get information from, but your support in that area. And at some point in time, depending on the planning, there might or might not be an ask to the General Assembly at, hey, this is what it's going to look like to sustain it. Here's the return to the Commonwealth. This is what we're asking for. So next slide.
Can I ask a quick question?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Who's the MOU with? Is it with VAUDA or with ODU or with the state, or who's the who are the people?
I believe it's a state and ODU.
You're talking about the MOU?
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Is that with
DMA
with the
one?
Department of
I think
Energy?
it's DMA.
Yes.
I think it's our agency and
You're-
ODU.
Kathy's confirmed, but yeah, okay. So
Yeah, and it's,
state.
I looked at it, unless something's happened, it looks like it's still in place.
I agree with that assessment of it.
Okay, I just
Yeah,
wanted to clarify.
still in place.
It's
Unfunded.
about-
It's unfunded,
You know,
correct.
yeah.
I think you ran that task force under it, or Paul ran that task force under it, you know, whatever.
As part of the Commonwealth Task Force.
It's the Commonwealth Task Force. This would put a little bit different activity under there. And when I read it, it looked like you could drive a truck through it, which is sort of my favorite kind of agreement. Just coming from the
Yeah,
commercial.
there's a couple other points that it directed ODU to be not just the gatekeeper of leases, but also to develop a website and a landing page for those with interest of using the lease areas. So it was a whole list of things that I think fit in our valid objective that just was funded for 1 year and then never funded again.
It was funded for 3 years.
Sorry,
Yeah,
yeah.
my
I
interpretation
think it was
is,
all used up in the first year, right? I don't-
No, but it was not
Yeah.
enough money to accomplish all of those
Right,
things.
Right,
So the ask is a letter of support.
from VAUDA.
ask is a letter of support. And the second part of the ask is, hey, those leases, I got a framework. If I can line up the money to do it, and we'd love to put it under there. And it looks like we've got authority or an MOU in place that would allow us to do it.
And I know what aerial is, but what the heck does it stand for?
Next slide.
Hey, Terry.
It's not the Little Mermaid.
Yeah. I know.
Okay, well,
The NOAA Climate Data Accelerator Planning Grant, which service of, what is it? Flight
ICE.
service or ocean service?
I own,
Oh, IUS. Okay.
Yeah. In fact,
Ocean observing system.
one of our teammates on there is Mark Maricus. So I guess I use on a regional basis turfed out
Regional.
to the different regions. So we brought them on board because they're basically, if we're looking at data, right? How do we do technologies that get that better data everywhere from sensors through platforms, through communications, through data lakes, through analysis, right? Any of those are fine. We're looking for advancement. They're the ones with experience of sort of what I would call retail data distribution. So.
Real-time data.
Yeah, and Jennifer Whitlaw, who's one of our professors, who's on my team, who I worked with on Windsite, used to work for Maricus. So it's like the stars are kind of aligned up. But back to what Ariel needs, and it's kind of geeky, and I'll get rid of it if it really
Well,
doesn't
dating,
work.
we got to have an acronym. So.
It's not.
Oh, okay.
It's not an
All
acronym,
right.
okay?
It can be.
It's,
We'll work
it's,
on it. We'll
it's
work on it.
very Virginia.
Okay.
Shakespeare wrote a play called The Tempest. It was based on a shipwreck that happened on a ship that was going to Jamestown.
Aerial.
And the person found this sprite, this kind of fairy or she or whatever language you're calling this stuff in, who's basically the one who said, hey, on land, I'm sea on air. I'm your person. I'm your go-to person. So that kind of with area, it could be on the water, below the water, over the top. Honestly, we've started discussions with the folks over in Portugal. They're trying to do something very similar. And we're going, wouldn't it be kind of cool to have a cross-Atlantic range? In fact, I'll be in Lisbon for the Oceans Conference in March. And so.
Well, that sounds good.
Anyway, questions?
When would a deadline be due? Like, when is the letter needed?
It's a rolling submission.
Oh.
Tom Krebs, you know Tom?
Yeah.
Yeah, I spoke with Tom before the end of the year to tell him why I hadn't been putting in on the expansion of Winsight, because we're waiting to hear on our step with the state, which is when I brought up, hey, I've got another one. Navy says it'd be really valuable. It solves the issue you have of, let's promote the use of these leases.
Yep.
So,
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to do then, is open it up for quick discussion. Because the idea here is to, let's say, vote on providing a letter of support for this phase one. Any other, either clarification, Kathy, you want to give, or any other quick relevant comments?
The importance of R&D as far as not just, it's one of our objectives, but it also allows us to respond to issues proactively versus reactively. And that's very, very important. We don't want somebody else's research to come up and bite us when it could have been developed in our own wheelhouse.
Yeah.
And we've not made much progress in that objective of R&D. And this was one of the options from the SWOT analysis. And now that it has some funding, some backing, some extra partners, having the military, especially the Navy, involved as a partner is crucial. And I think will be a very great letter of support for that effort also from the Navy. Not always easy to get. And adding not just the offshore wind lease area, but the Willoughby area also is, I think it's a win-win for everyone, not just for the letter of support, but also for maybe relooking at that MOU if it needs to be adjusted to the current DOE instead of VMME, and maybe tweaking the language some as well. We should maybe look at as a separate item from the letter of support to providing some input to the department on how that should be reworked.
Yeah, no, I like that. Any other comments?
I guess I have an admin question, being relatively new to this group. Does this authority have the authority to submit letters of support?
Yeah, we've done that in the past.
If you don't have the authority, we've been doing it for 10 years.
I think
Jerry, you, our letters of support was helped get
Exactly what it is.
this initial
I
grant
had a letter of support, which helped me get that phase one.
from Bowden.
Yeah, there were a number
Yeah.
of nice little pieces
Yeah.
Yeah.
that pulled together for that.
Eileen?
I have a question about aerial, not about the letter of support. Is that okay?
Kind of, if it steers us back to voting on the letter, but go ahead.
Well, just within the realm of things that you're looking at, technologies, is floating wind also in there?
You know, the nice thing about these, well, it's offshore renewables in general.
Okay.
So it can be everything from wind to floating to wave to current to tidal. And if you deal with the NREL and the DOE folks these days, they're using more of the language of offshore renewable energy than you using offshore wind. And our take is the technologies cut across all of it. You know, you're looking for North American right whales, regardless of whether you're pounding piles into the bottom or you're doing a survey or you're doing whatever. So these are all enabling technologies that just make life and operations and business off the coast better.
Yeah.
And that's what we're aimed at.
Okay, any other comments about submitting a letter?
Submit a letter of support.
Okay.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so VAUDA will submit a letter of support for this grant. Jerry, if I could leave it to you and Al to craft some draft language for signature, and we'll go from there. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you.
Any other question? If anybody has any other questions on Ariel, I know Jerry is a wealth of knowledge and loves talking about that stuff, so.
Be an overnight success once it gets up and
Next
going.
project is your turn.
All right, thanks,
I
Jerry.
appreciate it, everybody.
Thank
Good to
you.
see some familiar faces. Oh, yeah, you saw that. I could lose it if need be. I'll call it Snurgle for you.
All right, moving into the relevance of where we are with session going on right now. Al, we talk about legislative update.
Little bit. You have a summary of the two bills that are clearly and directly in the realm of offshore wind. Senate Bill 578 would do what it says here and a lot more. And it's very broad, I would say. There's a lot to be interpreted in that. We don't have any idea yet from the governor's policy team or from the offshore wind coordination team or any other policy focused group above our own Office of Policy. Whether they support it, whether they are a sponsor or whether they're still looking at something on their own. But clearly it goes after one of the key principles that the governor's office has put forward on offshore wind, that it be affordable. And that competition be entered into the process somehow. And as you know, there was legislative attempts in the last session to do that didn't get traction. Here's another attempt, even bolder, I guess, from first reading. But like I said, I don't know if the regulatory construct in Virginia would require additional changes or not. But it's pretty straightforward, I think.
And as Howard, down there, what is your opinion on capping that and the dollar amount? No matter how, What
That's
size
six
goes in?
eighty-eight.
Of the other bill, that's the second.
Yeah.
That's the second one,
Right, okay.
688.
Yeah, that one, I think, I'm not sure what the genesis of that would be. Is there some issue that's being raised that somehow was a problem
Mhm.
previously? I just thought that kind of came out of left field. As far as I was.
That's our analysis as well. And we have some outstanding phone calls that haven't been returned yet. As of yesterday, we did.
I think the other bill is certainly consistent with what we put in the white paper overall, just at a visual level. To recommend more competition.
Any discussion on any of these bills? I'm sure you guys have seen.
What about a letter of support?
Yeah, so the interesting thing here, I'll talk a little bit about. It was really gonna see, kind of what we discuss as a board, and then also talking with Virginia Energy. From what I just heard from Al, governor's administration is not waiting yet. The offshore wind coordination team is not waiting yet.
I meant eventually.
Question from the public or statement from the public.
Okay, so yes, the governor's office has been very involved in the deeds bill. Their policy team has been heavily reviewing it. And this is a heavy coalition of developers and NGOs, putting this bill together. So, and we started this process, late last summer, before we knew what the General Assembly was actually going to look like this year. And so the expectation is that we were going to have a split assembly, Republican and Democrat. And so had started the process with the governor's office to get their full backing on this bill. So the governor's office has been fully aware and is in support of Senator Biggs' bill.
They haven't told us that yet.
But if these points reflect the white paper, would just a general letter saying that these are the points that of policy that VALDA support these points in that bill as well? Right, well, without supporting the bill itself, but supporting the points of the bill?
Support the ideas of the bill.
Who's the letter of
Greater
support? Who
competition.
go to?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question. I think really I've written down several comments that I think need for us to be clear of kind of what the procedure would be of supporting this. Everything from, a few key dates. I think the first key date would really be, crossover. We have to get something in by crossover. So the 13th of February, if we were gonna decide to formally support a piece of legislation or the goals or intentions or ideas of a piece of legislation. And then whether or not that gets into our bylaws of how we do special meetings, virtual meetings to basically come together and vote on something.
Do one.
Yeah, so, but again, to Al's question, who exactly would the letter be
Or two, whichever.
to is something that we'd have to determine.
Can a letter be sent to the members of the General Assembly?
I've never
Say more to
heard of
the
that.
administration or to the department for you.
How does it get
to then
dispersed
take
out?
to-
Yeah, I think that's the better play is we would write a letter of support essentially to the department and or the administration, because we're the board under them and say, this is what we think, give it to your policy minions and distribute accordingly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the other piece, we were talking about, kind of in line with our own authority and what we're supposed to be doing is, again, support for an idea or a bill of, does this not only meet our white paper, but is it good for Virginia? That's kind of like the big question, because yes, there are lots of developers involved, public and private. There are differing opinions, right? So one of the things I can speak personally for my own association is what the answer we've been trying to solve is, does competitive procurement in the offshore wind space, is it good for Virginia in the sense of, at least in my case, allowing our own maritime and adjacent supply chains to maximize on the offshore wind industry, period. At least that's, again, I'm speaking only for like how my association is looking at it. Because if we can objectively say yes to that, then it's something that we can get behind, that by having multiple developers, you have multiple vendors, tier ones, tiers two, you have a greater sense of a busier, more involved, thriving supply chain, right? When it comes to the cost of power or other things or what that might look like, I open that up more for discussion because that's less than with what I deal with on a day-to-day basis. But it's worth discussing as a group here what we would like to do. But it is early because, like I said, there could be amendments, there could be all kinds of things that come with this bill.
What's crossover?
So crossover is the point in the General Assembly when both houses, the House and the Senate, they have to be finished with the bills on their side and then hand it over to the other side. So all the House bills go to the Senate for consideration, all the Senate bills go over to the House for consideration. So that date, they're supposed to be all wrapped up with their own chamber bills by the 13th of February. And then they hand it over.
Thank you.
Jennifer.
Just for awareness, this coming Monday, this bill will be first presented before, labor. So we'll get the first hearing on the bill on Monday.
Is there a caucus for, that would,
There's what?
is it like there's a military caucus? Is there a energy caucus?
I don't think so.
Okay.
That committee,
Yeah, so-
Camping road caucus.
Yeah.
That certainly might be.
There is,
Is it still Thursday morning?
there is no house count to this yet.
Gotcha.
There had been one, I heard that Delegate Askew was in that, but Delegate Scott settled it.
well,
There's a commission on electric utility regulation, which is composed mostly of members of the House delegates and the Senate. It is supposed to be a clearinghouse. It's not necessarily a caucus, but you folks have been appointed to be available. I don't think that I wouldn't think it's gonna be an active body this session. There's been a first meeting, I serve on it, that's why I mentioned. It's 2 citizen members, but otherwise it's like 6 members each. 1,000 delegates and. But for what it's worth, I don't know that they consider themselves an energy caucus as such.
So I think it goes back to the idea of if VAUDA was to write a letter of support for the goals or intentions of competitive procurement that we send up to the administration through the Department of Energy. It's looking at the talking points and coming up with something that we feel
It was in our
makes,
annual report.
yeah.
So it's reiterating that
Mhm.
as submitted in our annual report, these points also in the white paper, blah, 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 blah.
Mhm.
So where are we sending it?
The Department of Energy. From us.
How about sending it to the governor?
I mean, it would be, in my mind here, we're submitting it to the administration via the Department of Energy.
Yeah, we're under the Secretary of Commerce and Trade and the
Mhm.
Governor's Cabinet. And so we pass on your policy recommendations and the annual report and the white papers through our director, who's an appointed official from the administration, to that team. Not to say you can't
I
submit
would
it.
recommend that a copy of it
To
go
wherever
to
you
the
want.
Offshore Wind
Sure.
Commission or work or whatever they're called.
That
Are you
other
on,
group,
Chris?
Yeah.
the other.
That
group.
one, that one.
It's our-
Yeah.
It's our agency.
It's your agency work.
Do they even meet
That-
one?
We do.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
If
But the
you,
ACT.
if you send it to the governor, it doesn't go right to him. It goes to the Secretary of Commerce, right? And then,
I don't think anything you send to the governor goes directly to the governor.
but then Secretary of the Commonwealth distributes it to the appropriate.
And there's a policy office, there's that offshore wind coordination team, which multi-cabinet members, there's layers. It's where, and oh boy, did we get letters from the governor's office that are, even looks like his email, but it's not a real email. It goes to constituent services and obviously he could never look at everything that comes to him.
So I think though, it comes back to, again,
Post him eventually.
under our authority and limitations, this does fit where we're looking at our primary purpose of VAUDA is for the facilitating, coordinating and supporting the development of the offshore wind industry, offshore wind energy projects, associated supply chain vendors and among other such duties. So basically, if we feel that SB 578 kind of fits in there and says, yeah, this is consistent with what we think, based on what we previously submitted with white paper, annual report, et cetera. Again, I think that's on the table for discussion. Any more discussion on this?
I think we go for it.
Yeah, I move that
Yeah.
we, write a letter of support for Senate Bill 578.
Discussion,
Being
little discussion.
consistent with the
Mhm.
annual report. We want to reinforce the point, I guess.
Without reading through the whole bill and having it summarized in just these points, I would instead recommend that we just stick with what the points from the white paper that I think we all agreed on and our annual report. So it's just a reiteration to the administration of we already supported this anyway. We're happy to
said this
see this. And yeah, but not for the bill itself. We don't, I haven't read the whole bill. There might be like 2 or 3 points in there that we don't agree with. So that's fair.
Before you
So it's to the need of.
vote, are you proposing another meeting to review it? Are you authorizing the chair to work with the staff to produce a letter based on the recommendations in the annual report and the white paper?
authorize the chair working with staff and then Howard led the report as a subcommittee. It makes sense that that would be the threesome there.
I second.
I mean,
My concern with not mentioning Senate Bill 76 is that it be used as indirectly or directly as a support for Senate Bill 588, which we aren't.
688.
You got
688, yeah.
If
I don't
it's
want a letter if
specifically
it's not
titled
specific to-
competitive procurement.
Yes,
process,
the words
possibly.
competitive procurement are in there, that would be fine, because
Mhm.
then it can't be
Yeah.
used to support
Right,
Supervisor
right.
Bill.
Mhm.
But I don't want that letter of support being used by Suderline or anybody
Right,
supporting his
agreed.
bill.
Oh, that's a
As-
good point.
Agreed.
Actually, it's a very good point.
Agreed. Okay, so I know we won't worry too much about the parliamentarian side of it. We do have an active motion in second, but I know we're amending it right now. So I believe the new motion is,
To support, vow to submit a letter of support for competitive procurement. In line with our goal and mission.
okay, the motion.
But we do have to make reference to the bill though. don't we?
State bill, no. The state competitive procurement.
What we've done in the past, at least for the VMA side, is we've referenced the goals of the bill. And so it's a way to say like, I agree with the general idea of this bill without explicitly saying I agree with every line of text. So it could be something along those lines that we could specifically reference it, that in general, that we agree with like the spirit or the goals of the bill.
Concept. whatever.
Okay,
Concepts within the bill.
But don't reference a bill.
Now we're saying yes, reference the bill, but that not the specifics of the bill, the general concepts of the bill.
the spirit or the idea of the bill. You know, we've done that before, at least
Cool.
VMA has done that before.
So are the specific words for the competitive procurement process, or are we just making competitive procurement process encompassed within the spirit of the bill, idea of the bill?
So what it sounds.
Because
to me
we've
is-
said like 8, and I'm
Yeah,
trying
no,
to.
I appreciate that. So we're discussing and voting on VAUDA providing a letter of support
Through the chair,
for competitive procurement
okay,
and, you know, in support of the goals, theme, idea, spirit, something along the lines of SB 578.
okay.
Because it was probably gonna change. You know, there's gonna be amendments, there's gonna be things like that.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Right, it might, but without the support. So right now, we support it as, in general, as it's written,
We support the ideas of it.
right, the ideas of it. If some of the ideas change and we're still sending out a letter without knowing those changes, you might be, I think the sooner the Senate gets it
Mhm.
during their debates,
Mhm.
the better, knowing that VAUDA supports the concepts of the.
So might I suggest we just say in its present form?
Yeah, then we date it.
Yeah.
As introduced on.
As
Yeah.
introduced.
Okay, good.
As introduced is,
All right.
because since there's no other version right now.
Yeah.
We would say as introduced.
So the motion, I think when you mentioned it, also delegates
Yeah, so it will be,
authority.
so you will be authorizing the chair, Howard, and staff to provide a letter of support on the competitive procurement process in support of the ideas in Senate Bill 578 as introduced.
So no reason for
Competitive.
another meeting.
I say competitive procurement process. So okay. So there is a motion to authorize the chair, Howard Schaeferman, and the Virginia Department of Energy staff to provide a letter of support on the competitive procurement process in support of the ideas in Senate Bill 578 as introduced. Am I?
Second,
Does that bite us at all? Anybody feel, I feel pretty comfortable with that? All right, we have a motion, we have a second. All in favor?
I,
I need to abstain as based on my company could potentially benefit from it. So
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm on the record that I'm
That's-
abstaining.
Thank you for noting that. So
It is in the record.
abstaining from voting. Any opposed? Okay. Motion carries. We will write that letter. So again, what I would ask is the Department of Energy staff, if you could at least throw a draft together, looking at our, since we previously referenced kind of like what's in our work plan and what's in kind of the white paper, et cetera. If you want to at least kind of cobble together a first draft, and then Howard and I can take a stab at it. Fantastic.
And when do you contemplate presenting the letter?
Friday, Val.
There's not a House bill, which goes Fridays. Right? I mean, are we paid, like, there needs to be a complimentary bill on the House side, right, for this to really.
No, I mean, there's no need to have a patron bill. Doesn't have to have one. It'll just go over, once the Senate, it just means that the Senate could, if it's a Senate bill, the Senate could kill it and it doesn't go to the House for consideration or anything like that. It's just done. But as long as it carries through the Senate and then it'll get passed over during crossover. So there's no need for everything to have a companion bill.
But am I right too, that even if it doesn't make it through this process, then the governor has time at the end to also then submit with enough support? He could, like, that's what he did last year.
Well, the other thing too is because we're saying we support the ideas and the
Yes.
theme or the spirit of this bill.
Then to- could the
Kind of
supplement-
whatever happens to the bill is irrelevant because we're supporting the spirit of the bill
As introduced.
as introduced. Al, anything else you want to cover on the
Nope.
legislative update?
I mean, like I said, there are 80 bills. I think there's 60 when you combine the House Senate versions or the more than one version. At least 60.
At least 60 unique bills. So we'll word
So,
that.
and we don't have a detailed analysis of them.
All right, turning it over then to the staff for department update.
Can you share our slides, please? Thank you.
Ken, you want to do the smart power? Oh, wait a minute. The slides are up. I'm not sure what the order is.
Just, if you just want to go to slide 4, because that's what we're, actually it'd be 5. Just go to slide 6. And then from current slide. Why is that blank?
Why isn't that showing up?
Oh, there's two others.
I think it's just, there's a lag time usually, so just wait. So I don't know why it's not. All right, hold up, we're having PowerPoint issues.
Oh, waiting. Chris, do you want to give us an update on PMP?
Sure. Exciting times. I think, as many of you know, we received the second shipment of monopiles. What have now probably been 4 weeks ago. That went very well. The first delivery went well, but you can just see labor and our partners getting more comfortable and familiar with moving large monopiles. We are excited that the project, from a construction perspective, we're making, major headwinds and excuse me, we're not facing headwinds. We're overcoming challenges and not having headwinds. But what I'm trying to get to is by midsummer, we will have completed installation of all of the piles. And that has been obviously, there's been some feedback from surrounding waterfront communities since that sound, based on either cloud cover or time of day. I don't know, but it can travel. We will be done with over 1,300 piles having been installed there at PMT. hopefully mid-summer. So we're tracking very well and obviously trying to be responsive to the community. Because again, depending on cloud cover and just how the sound travels, it can obviously be a nuisance. And I understand we can hear it down here sometimes. So, but ultimately the project's going real well. Excited that, there'll be some different cargo. It's obviously been monopiles up to this point. We expect there to be additional like transition pieces and maybe some other pieces showing up here in the spring. So again, thinking about the marketing aspect and getting that exposure, definitely everybody that's been involved in supply chain and offshore wind vendors and being able to push these images out and just gain, that exposure that we're doing in Virginia. It's real. It's no longer just being talked about and conceptually proposed and researched and studied. We're moving components here in Virginia. That work is happening. And so I think come May, there are going to be a lot of big steel pieces there at PMT when we begin the outload of the CVAL project at that point. So no, it's definitely moving along very nicely. And, it's exciting to see the work actually happening. So more to come, but if anyone wants a tour or has additional questions offline, feel free to reach out. Obviously, we always want to be open and engaged to our colleagues and stakeholders and to the God board so that you can know the latest and greatest that's happening there at PMT. Have we got technology fixed?
Good to go.
That was,
We filled the silence while they were doing tech issues.
I love it.
Yeah.
We get ocean out of the fly more.
What? Yeah.
Pounding.
there you go.
All right, Smart Power, you all know, partnership between North Carolina, Maryland, and Virginia. In January of last year, NREL released their National Supply Chain Roadmap. They're going on to do a regional roadmap for these 3 states and Delaware. And they've had several meetings already. They've got a basic plan of action in place, what they're going to look at, and both of them. And the report will be done in 2025, and hopefully it'll be useful for everyone involved. How much more to say than that?
There's another slide.
Yeah, you got on the other side, buddy.
That's basically what I said.
Yeah. Documented narrative. It's your documented narrative.
Yeah, and the one thing about this to keep in mind is this concept of the regional workforce and supply chain gap analysis and roadmap was born before the economic headwinds hit really hard. And so I don't know that that's really affecting what they look at. They still look at the same things. Do you have the right workforce? And if not, how are the gaps going to be filled? And hopefully it'll still validate that this region, the Central Atlantic region, these 3 states in particular, will demonstrate that it's bigger than just the CVAL commercial project and even the Avangrid project, that it's bigger than that and make us look better compared to the much larger investment and incentive wise regional groups north of us, Northeast and New England.
Is Delaware actually considering, is their governor gonna join the MOU for Smart Power, or are they just participating, or how?
And there's been a discussion of adding them to it. They're putting some resources in it, and they have some resources.
I did notice from Matt's slide, just to point out that Maryland is looking for 8 gigawatts. North Carolina is looking for 8 gigawatts, and we're still at 5.2.
Yes, just need to be 8 gigawatts.
Well,
Be a good recommendation.
one item in the news summary you got,
Mhm.
I'll just
Yes.
mention that and come back. We do a weekly analysis, team, mostly Ryan, and
And Ed.
The-
Ed
Ed is very helpful.
and Larry when he can help. of gathering up all the news reports we can find about offshore wind and the supply chain. And we just put in a couple of months worth here. And at the end, one thing that I don't think it's been in the news yet, but BOEM is setting up meetings with the Central Atlantic states regarding a new Central Atlantic lease opportunity, a second one. And no doubt that is partly to appease Maryland and Delaware, who are very upset with the final wind energy areas. Where, there's limited number and size. I don't think North Carolina was thrilled, but they weren't as vociferous about.
They have 3 potential.
Yeah, they've got
They share us and 2 others.
better situation. So just so you know, that's in there near the end. I don't think it's made any news reports yet.
And I have talked to Bowl about it, and the good news is, it's not like did they just start over, like from scratch? Like essentially where Virginia has landed, what is good for Virginia, and I say that explicitly because kind of where we are is good for Virginia when you consider all the things. So DoD, commercial shipping, fishing, offshore wind, all the things. So it's not like we're gonna have to refight that fight. At least off our coast. So I throw that out there just for perspective.
Can you go back one slide? Yeah, the bullet, creating new workforce training centers. Is that something that the Smart Power Group is looking into? I believe that training center is located in Hampton Roads.
That was one of the things the national supply chain study did. The regional study, I haven't heard any mention of creating anything. It's
They're
more
gonna be looking at
identifying.
training, what's happening in each state,
Mhm.
how we can collaborate.
Eileen, you
Share
might-
One
resources.
center, but it might be multiple.
and Eileen, you probably know best, though. I guess my question, because it's part of the bigger workforce discussion we're having in Virginia, is what is the current capacity of the training centers and are they full?
Right.
Because one of the concerns with what's going on in the bigger supply chain or the bigger workforce picture too, is everyone wants a training center to train on everything. And we have lots of training centers that they're empty. And so it's like the perspective of it, is it a training capacity issue or is it a butts and seats issue? Like, yeah, marketing and.
Yeah, and the folks who are doing the study are very cognizant of that, and it's a really tough chicken or egg proposition about when to do this, and you have to have the jobs, but you also can't get caught with your pants down if some huge announcement comes along. You don't have, you're starting from scratch.
Right.
So they're going to be looking for that happy medium, and that's going to be hard.
And one of the leads on the NREL team is George Haberman,
Yeah.
then you know, so he's very, well educated about this region. And so I think I'll go agree.
Still in Virginia or did
He
you?
is.
Yes. Right.
Moving on.
Uh,
Give me the names.
Hey,
It's
And
coming,
there's-
just give it a sec.
The next slide.
It's
Yeah, buffering in there.
waiting.
Oh. You have to leave the room again, Will.
Yeah.
Slide didn't come up.
okay, when you gave us the handout, we're going to the next topic is the Danish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yes.
well, I'll just mention that one of the next steps from that meeting, believe it or not, included the meeting with, there's 2 things really with the DEA, the Danish Energy Agency. One, they're going to reach out to you, Chris, Nick, that you may already have. He would like to in late February, I believe it is, 28th. Their Director General of that agency. And we have an MOU with DEA to collaborate on things offshore wind and supply chain. I've had an ongoing relationship for several years now. And they've visited before, their ambassador visited once. And this will be a third in-person visit. And they would like to see PMT, Fairwind Landing, if possible, or at least have a meeting, maybe in that environment where they can. And then they're on their way back to DC, stop in Richmond and have an opportunity to meet with our director, the staff, maybe somebody from the governor's office, ever catch one of them and pin them down to a date. Right now, everybody's clear because it's February 28th, but when it gets there, we'll see.
Is that a hard date?
That's just what they said at this
Okay.
point.
Cool, because I know Dominion is planning a offshore or CVAL supplier meeting on the 28th, possibly the 27th for like supply chain, all that kind of stuff.
And they want to meet with Dominion specifically also, so. I don't know what-
Yes, I'm sure y'all are coordinated with them, but just there's an event being planned, which probably a lot of their people are gonna be there, but I'm sure, and so I think this event is sliding to 27th. I don't know, I'm speculating here.
And Nick could change the date. That was what they were looking at when we talked to him just a few days ago. Has he reached out to you already?
Yes.
Okay. So he hadn't changed it as of then.
Just the whole day.
Yeah.
Time to be determined.
Right. We also met with them. We requested their support on some of the issues regarding power offtake. And they, of course, have a different experience and a different environment in Europe. But they invited Ørsted and an old friend of the Commonwealth who's now at Ørsted. He's from he joined that call. And Howard, you were able to join that, and they didn't really unveil the silver bullet for us. They gave us some more nuance maybe to consider. And one example there was that some of the large energy consumers, the Googles and others like them, who had these commitments to reach zero carbon by some nearby date, that one of the issues is now to be able to say, it makes that commitment more valuable and more competitive if you're competing against others doing the same thing, to say we've matched our consumption 24/7. So the wind component would have that timestamp of later in the day, and maybe into the evening. I don't know exactly how you would calculate that, but obviously we've all heard that solar and wind are complementary because wind gets stronger when solar production declines later in the day. So that was something that they thought might be an advantage to get a PPA sold to one of those kinds of companies that uses a ton of power and has goals to make it 100% renewable. And Howard, anything else strike you from that session that you thought was new or helpful?
No, I think that was an interesting point. I didn't hear anything else particular you can transfer in.
Yeah, because they don't really face the same situation. They usually have a clear path to market for the power because they're bidding on projects where there's a like situation like Senate Bill 578 we try to create in Virginia. Next slide.
See on this one, but
Yeah, I think we already talked about that one.
these area updates,
Yeah, we covered that one.
for sale notice.
Okay, buffering.
Oh, there we go.
And this you all know about.
Yep. That should be it.
Want to close room?
Think so? One of the things I'll throw out there that's related, and I think Laura knows more about this too. So there's gonna be a meeting coming up, I think in March sometime, by Marco, talking about the transmission side of offshore wind. It's an offshore wind transmission summit. And it's state, federal agencies. I think Coast Guard's going, I'm going, some of the select kind of offshore wind folks. Because another thing that we haven't really talked about, but I'll at least throw out there that is in discussions, is this idea of getting a better handle on cable routing. And so instead of having an ocean floor of spaghetti, to really have some rhyme or reason, common sense. And I know we've had conversations with the Coast Guard about this, the Army Corps, et cetera. So I thought that was interesting that Marco's doing that. I'm planning to go to be involved in that
And
discussion.
it's a kind of a part two, because they did one, at least over a year ago. Workshop. So it's something they've been looking at for a while. It's offshore transmission, not onshore. Offshore.
And it makes sense because we've had similar meetings with RVA 757 Connects, which is like a group that's trying to bring subsea telecom. And point being is when we think of the ocean floor, and this goes back to the bigger context of like what's good for Virginia as a whole, is there's so much going on that, and no one's talking, of course, everyone kind of doing their silo thing. But you got the telecom people that want to come land cables to shore. You got offshore wind wants to land cables to shore. You got anchorages that want to be put up. So you got nods, disposal areas, and kind of realizing like, it'd probably be good if everybody just kind of got together and talked about what's going on the ocean floor and making sense of. I mean, it's not an uncommon concept for at least pipelines to have kind of common right of ways, but kind of like in general, some sort of routing that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense. And for the Kitty Hawk project specifically, we had to deconflict our cables with Global Links that was bringing. So that's just a perfect, good local example of the necessity of being able to know what's going on, know who you have to work with. And then don't forget that, in our situation, for the Kitty Hawk situation, is that because the DoD has stuff in the waters and they can't tell us, anybody, any developer, what's in the water and where. Therefore, a developer cannot design around it. Therefore, there is a path of no-go because we cannot plan and design around what we can't know where it is. So, but it is definitely just Global Links and Avangard would be a good example of that.
Well, even Dominion, we had to do it. We're part of a big to-do.
Right.
With Dominion's export cables going across the 3 telecom cables right in front of the sea lane. And so it was impacting the actual available bathymetry to vessels. And I'll give a shout out to Dominion. After like the 3rd round of engineering, they came up with the design that would work for protecting their cables, but also reducing the footprint of these crossings. And so that's what really was kind of like the impetus, and Kitty Hawk to think about. We need more people kind of talking through what's going on down there instead of just everybody coming and just doing stuff. So
And just a reminder that the Marco Ocean Data Portal does have a whole theme on the undersea cable.
Yeah.
And if you think of anything that you've heard about or it's a proposal, let the portal team know. You'd like that added. And I know, Willie, you've done that several times and they're pretty quick at.
I love Marco. I send it to everybody.
How do you feel about?
Yeah, I just thought, I attended a really interesting, meeting yesterday. So for the first time, Coast Guard District 5 yesterday. So District 5 is New York, New Jersey to the border of North Carolina, South Carolina, did an all-day symposium where they brought all the developers between New York and South Carolina in to talk through search and rescue and sea lanes and fairways and, just sort of the soup to nuts of offshore wind and Coast Guard relationships. And then each project gave an update as well. So it was there were a lot of sort of, light bulbs that went off. You could kind of see them going off across the room. Mostly the maritime managers for each of the projects, but it was a really good sort of real collection brain power. And, what we're seeing is that in District 1, which is New England, is basically beta testing everything that the Coast Guard is doing. And then we're seeing it come down here to District 5 and, around the Gulf and 7 and then, California. So, but it was a really good opportunity. They had a huge cross section of the Coast Guard there of all the various departments. So it was a really excellent event yesterday.
Very good. So we're at the part about other business closing remarks. I'll say there's no public comment signed up, so we can omit that. Any other business or closing remarks by the members of the board?
Just have one question for the department. I think I hear there's legislation to regulate data centers, and one of their main arguments is their excessive energy usage. Does the department have any, is that one of your bills that you're looking at? It is, okay. And, okay. Do you need anything from us?
Can't think of anything. I
No,
mean,
Okay.
I don't think so.
there's, how many bills are there on just that?
On data centers,
Oh,
a handful, enough, enough.
Yeah, I don't know, and I don't know, yet what the administration's position is on those
No.
various bills. Good question. Thanks for asking.
One of
Appreciate-
the main arguments is, oh, it's excessive energy use. Okay.
Bring on more energy.
I think it's worth, I'll say what's worth it, because I asked my own members at BMA to do it, is like, hey, if you see something interesting, feel free to send it around, and then the staff team can kind of compile with their legislative updates and like send it to the group for stuff to be aware of. Because I don't at all assume to see everything, know everything, understand everything or the impact. So it's kind of asking for, if there's something you all think is remotely interesting that maybe we should at least look at, send it to the team. And they can compile. I'm not saying we're gonna do anything on it. We might, but at least it should be flagged. Any other comments from the team? Laura?
Question, do we have a date for the next week?
Mhm. Somewhere.
I think he's actually.
I think we set all four, but what's the upcoming date?
pull it up.
I don't know if we have a location, but we have it.
April,
Something.
Yeah.
like that.
The third week.
Is it? Looks like.
Yeah, next meeting, April 17th.
My own calendar. I didn't.
I will say, and I know the non-Hampton Roads folks will rejoice. Of our, as per the bylaws, one of our meetings does have to be in Richmond, so we can figure out what that's gonna be. That looks like maybe, because I know some of the other ones, I get pinched between meetings and I need to be here. Perhaps. I'll tell you what, if something doesn't come up in the next few weeks, at least on the calendar, if you guys could just make a note to, we can determine that the next few weeks and then pull the trigger. I am sensitive to it because I know
Could always do virtual too.
we could do virtual. We're allowed to have one virtual meeting a year.
How about the two?
yeah,
25% or two, whichever is
yeah,
more.
we got a more liberal interpretation from the
OAG.
Office of Attorney General.
So keep one for annual report stuff in case there's any emergencies, and then just use the other one at your.
Such a good advisor.
That's wrong.
Excellent. Any other comments? Okay, well, I thought this was a good meeting, so let me go over the do outs real quick. So we did vote and approve that we're gonna provide a letter of support for Ariel, and Jerry is gonna work with the staff to do a first draft, and then send it over for signature. You all have entrusted me to take care of that. And then we've also voted and approved a letter of support for the spirit of SB 578 as introduced, in accordance with, like I said, in some of the things we've already submitted. The team, the staff is going to put together a first draft to send over for me and Howard to look at. And then hopefully get that out the door sooner than later. So meeting's adjourned.
Great leadership. Good job.
Thank you, Will.
Yeah,
Thanks, Will.
very efficient.
But you know,